Hello, in today's video we're going to be learning some Blender keyboard shortcuts. We're going to start off with some all-purpose ones, then move on to some navigation shortcuts, and then we're going to end it off with some basic manipulation shortcuts and some modeling shortcuts. So to start off with our all-purpose shortcuts, we're going to use X to delete objects. Instead of having to right-click and find it in the menu, you can just press X whenever you want, and just like with normal deletion, it lets you choose what you delete in edit mode or other modes. Our next keyboard shortcut is pressing Shift A to add an object. So I'm just going to search for cube, but it saves you time from having to go through add, then mesh, then cube. You can just Shift A, cube. So that works pretty well. Then Shift D lets you duplicate objects. So you can either keep it completely still and then move it on its own later, or when you're duplicating it, you can move it around. And then if you want to lock it to a certain axis, you press either X, Y, or Z. So that one also helps a lot. Then our next one is going to be using F3 to search for objects or modifiers, or even like geometry nodes and stuff. Well, I mean, I guess that is a modifier, but it's pretty fun. Instead of having to go through all these menus up here to look for what you need, you can just search, oh, I need fur. Oh, I need a subdivision surface. And that also saves you time finding the modifiers that you want. So let's do subdivision surface as an example. See, it adds the modifier for me, and then I'm good. It's a really time-saving one, and it works for almost everything in Blender. The next one is going to be the start of our navigation category, with the middle mouse button being used to orbit. Instead of using this menu up here to orbit, you can just click and hold the middle mouse button. And then if you hold Shift while doing that, you can pan the viewport, so you don't have to use the hand tool over here. The next one is pressing Z to switch viewport shading modes. So you can either click the specific one you want, or you could press things like Z2 for a material preview, Z4 for a wireframe. Ooh, that's a really high vertex sphere. Z6 for solid view, and then Z8 for rendered view. All of those are pretty nice to know, and it's just a quick little time saver from having to go up here. Speaking of going up here near the shading modes, you can press Alt-Z to turn on X-ray mode. So if you go into edit mode, you can see why that might be useful. So if you turn on X-ray, maybe you want to select half of the sphere, but you don't want to have to individually click every single vertex. You can turn on X-ray mode, then select what you want. And X-ray mode basically lets you select things through other parts of the mesh, which can be really, really handy. And then our final one for navigation is just using the scroll wheel instead of the little zoom thing over here. That one I'm pretty sure most of you know, but if you don't, it can be really helpful to know that one. Now onto the basic manipulation category. This one is for things like move, rotate, and scale. So you can press G to grab, and then you can either use it like a freeform move tool, or you can lock it to a single axis with X, Y, or Z. That locking it to a single axis applies to all of these. And then with rotate, this one's a bit weird, because instead of going along like a freeform one or a locked axis, by default rotate goes on an angle based off of the viewport direction. So right now it's rotating this way. If I look here, it's rotating that way. It's just an interesting one. And then if you press R a second time, because you press R to do rotate, if you press R twice, then it gives you a trackball rotate, which is also sometimes pretty handy. Then you can press S to scale. This, just like the other ones, can be locked to one axis. Pretty funky though. And then same for rotate. It can also be locked to one axis. Yeah, that one's a bit silly. So now we're going to be moving on to some modeling shortcuts. The first one is if you press Tab, you can switch to edit mode. Really handy, saves you time going, object, edit, what do I want to do? Stuff like that. The next one is while in edit mode, or the other modes that allow you to mess with individual vertices. You can press 1 to do vertex selection mode, 2 to do edge selection mode, and then 3 to do face selection mode. And then you can do any of these from any of the other ones. It's pretty handy. I might select maybe these faces right here, and then switch to vertex or edge mode. Then the next one is pressing E to extrude. Instead of using the extrude tool, you can just select the faces you want to extrude, press E, and it by default extrudes along their normals. But then if you press any of the axis keys, X, Y, Z, then it locks it to that specific one. And if you have Z selected, you can press Z a second time to do the normals. Pretty cool. And then you can also do it without being locked to anything to get these interesting shapes. Now we're going to be using Control R to make a loop cut. So I'm going to put a loop cut right here in the middle. It's really helpful for stuff like characters and rigs where you want to make sure that it deforms nicely to whatever shape you specify. So adding loop cuts can really help with that. And it's nice that there's a short little shortcut to use that, instead of having to use the loop cut tool. The next one is pressing I to inset something. Inset basically makes a smaller or larger, but usually you don't do larger. It makes a smaller copy of whatever faces you've selected, or vertices or edges. So if I inset this top face on this cube, it makes a smaller face right here. And then I can extrude that. So that can be pretty handy. The next one is pressing M to merge selected vertices together. So if I did at center, that'll let me merge those few. But maybe I have an extra vertex in between these, or I have a region on a more complex mesh that I want to merge. I can choose 2 vertices, press M, and then choose what I want to merge them at. If I do at center, it moves them to the center of each other. At cursor, it goes to the 3D cursor. At collapse, tries to kind of go for middle-ish. At first, does whichever one you selected first. At last, does whichever one you selected last. And then by distance, you can choose what the merge distance is, and if they get close enough within that threshold, they just merge together at the center. Another handy one is pressing K for the knife tool. So then you can add vertices where you need them. Like if you want to extrude something or maybe fix topology, that one can be really handy. And then our final little one for this is just if you're trying to find one of these tools, or maybe, if you're trying to find one of the tools in edit mode, you can also use F3 to find them. So you can just use the F3 menu to find tools if you're not sure what the shortcut for them is, or you can't find them over here. So maybe I want to bevel this. I can do that. Although, for that, I don't think you could really bevel it, but yeah. So F3 can help you find tools as well as like objects and modifiers and stuff. So that's wrapping up our little Blender shortcut journey. I hope that this video helps you, and thanks for watching.